Welcome to a new era of personalized investing, where private investors understand that true value lies beyond mere relative performance. Amity recognizes that investing is a deeply personal journey, and success is not just about numbers. Discover a refreshing approach to investing that prioritizes clients' goals and well-being. Unlike ordinary investment options, we are dedicated to a true outcomes-based strategy, bringing certainty to investment outcomes. Don't settle for the ordinary. Embrace the future of predictability and certainty with our outcomes-based investment approach. At Amity, we believe in delivering personalized solutions crafted specifically for advisors' clients, understanding their risk appetite, goals, and preferences. Join us now and unlock the potential of a more rewarding and fulfilling investment experience that goes beyond the mere performance and places the client and their aspirations at the center of everything we do. Reduce uncertainty with outcomes-based investing. Amity Investment Solutions.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our last webinar for 2023. We would like to thank everyone who attended our webinars so religiously throughout the year. And for anyone who may be attending our webinars for the first time, welcome to you as well. And if you are interested to maybe go and revisit any of the webinars we've done, we do post them on our YouTube channel. So please go and visit our YouTube channel and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Now, today's session is focused on ethics. And from a continuous professional development perspective, we will submit the session to the FPI and we'll also then communicate with those who attended if there are any CBD certificates available. That also goes for all of the webinars that we've actually hosted for this CBD cycle. Now, I'm very excited for this morning as we have Chris van der Walt, Professor Alsemgeest, Anton Swanepoel and Germa Beukes on the webinar. Now, this is a 2-hour session, so what we'll do is we'll just halfway through break for 10 minutes, have a comfort break, and then we'll just retake with the last 2 speakers to finish up. Let's start with our first speaker this morning. I asked Chris van der Walt from EasyFika to join me in studio for an interview session. Now, Chris needs no introduction when it comes to Fika, but he did start the company EasyFika. But today's session, we will talk and focus on the changes to the Fika regulations, some practical guidance to you, the audience, and then we will, from there, move on to Germa Beukes. Germa has been working as a compliance specialist and chief executive officer at Sirius Lex Consulting. So those are our first 2 speakers that we will start off. So let's head on over and let me start the interview with Chris this morning. Chris, thank you so much for taking the time out to come and share with us some insightful information on this topic of specifically Fika. And also, after we chatted a bit about Fika, we will move on to a different topic. We will talk about ethics, and it's almost, let's say, in its purest form this morning. So, Chris, it's quite a lengthy CV that you have, spending some time in corporate as well. And I suppose that what you do nowadays is it's much more different than what you previously had in your corporate life. But let's start this morning with the topic of Fika and the components of Fika. Since 2002, the Fika Act has undergone 2 major amendments. Legislative changes that were implemented in 2010 saw the enactment of the requirement for accountable and reporting institutions to submit cash threshold reports. And then in 2017, we saw that second tranche of amendments come through to the FICT Act, which further entrenched this transparency, the traceability and accountability in the financial system. Among the changes to this regulation was the recent change, well, not so recent, but the implementation of the risk-based approach and customer due diligence. I'm going to ask you to maybe first share with us, do you see or foresee any further amendments or changes in the specific or regular amendments to the FIC Act?
I don't foresee any immediate further amendments. The most recent amendments that we saw beyond the 2017 approach, change in approach to a risk-based approach, occurred in December last year, with a substantial expansion of the definition of an accountable institution. So, and a number of other things, the introduction of employee due diligence and so forth. These were all aspects that were brought in to encourage or rather try and get South Africa out of its current grey-listed status. So those are standards that we were regarded as a country to not have adhered to. And they are quite far-reaching and wide in scope. So apart from those that must still be fully implemented and then enforced and policed, I don't really foresee any major changes. There may be slight adjustments in terms of numerical value of reportable transactions and things like that, but even those have recently been adjusted already. So no, I think that we're entering a relatively, certainly for financial services, we are entering a relatively peaceful period with regards to changes and enforcement.
Now you mentioned for the financial services maybe a bit of a pause, or at least, but which industries or sectors or even high risk sectors are then starting to be or considered or looked at from the FIC? And specifically, maybe you alluded to it just now, the accountable institution and the changes to who's going to be incorporated under this umbrella of accountable institutions.
Yes. So one of the implications of the December changes to the definitions was that your reference earlier to the introduction of reporting institutions, those have now been eliminated. And what were previously reporting institutions, which were dealers in gold coins and motor dealers, have all become accountable institutions. In addition, some other relatively high-risk industries, and let me just be clear, it's not you or I saying that they are high-risk industries. This comes from the Financial Action Task Force, which is the international standard-setting organization, are credit providers, and in particular in South Africa, the so-called high-value goods providers. So high-value goods providers would be any business which has as an inventory item that it sells individual items of a value of 100,000 Rand or more. So that brings into the fold, again, all motor dealers, jewelers, any business for that matter that sells relatively high-value items. They all have to comply with all the provisions of the FICA now since December of last year, and they have been forewarned that starting January, February this year, I think that the inspections are going to start happening to check whether they have complied. We already see the FIC sending out alerts, notices, cautions of impending penalties for many of those institutions who were obliged to submit information to the FIC and who may not yet have done so. So they're already beginning to feel the tightening of the noose, as it were.
Talking about accountable institutions as well, I mean, according to Section 43 of the Financial Intelligence Centre Amendment Act, accountable institutions must provide ongoing training relating to anti-money laundering and the financing of terrorism to its employees with the purpose of complying with the provision. Now, perhaps importantly, tell us a bit more about the practical implementation for IFAs as well as the cost of not complying.
It is always useful with a practical implementation to understand the bigger picture, to understand what it is exactly that is required of you. And in order to do that, we must understand what the role and the purpose of the FICA is as a piece of legislation. So forgive me if I kind of increase the scope of your question a little bit. But the FICA establishes the Financial Intelligence Centre. Okay. The purpose and the role and the scope of the Financial Intelligence Centre is to combat the money laundering, to combat the financing of terrorist activities, and to combat the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. And how it does this is not by criminalizing those activities. We have other pieces of legislation like Poctatara and POCA, which criminalizes those activities. But the FICA is designed, and this Financial Intelligence Centre is South Africa's credible source of money laundering related information, which we have to remit to the Financial Action Task Force in order to remain members of the Financial Action Task Force and to be able to meaningfully participate in the international economy. So they tell us what standards to adhere to, and they don't pluck these out of thin air. The basis on which they formulate those standards is the information that they receive back from all the member countries in very specific format. So that is the role and the purpose of the Financial Intelligence Center. If we understand that, then we understand that out of the 7 main obligations that an accountable institution incurs, the most important obligation is the obligation to make reports in respect of a variety of listed kind of items, suspicious transactions, suspicious activity, cash threshold transactions, those kinds of reports. Because it is in the reports that we are able to, as a country, to discharge our obligation to the Financial Action Task Force. And everything which surrounds the making of the report, all the other compliance obligations that rests on an accountable institution, are obligations that are there to enable the institution to identify the reports and to make them in good time. So it's just a little support structure.
Maybe tell us a bit just more, just highlight and remind us the 7 steps that you just referred to now.
The 7 obligations. So in simple terms, the first obligation on an accountable institution is the obligation to register as such with the FIC on their GoAML electronic web-based platform. And then the second obligation is that you must develop a set of internal procedures which will allow you to comply. Those are in the law referred to as your Risk Management and Compliance Program, or RMCP. And the RMCP is very specific in terms of its compulsory content. It lists everything that you have to deal with so that you have an internal procedures document. Following from the internal procedures document, there is a general training obligation, which can be divided into 2. The first part is that your staff must have a working knowledge of the aims and the objectives of the Act. And then following on to that, because you've now drafted this RMCP, your staff, certainly those who are in positions where they might identify reportable transactions, also have to have a working knowledge of the content of your procedures, of your RMCP. So that's the training obligation. Then you have an obligation to know your customer, or what in the old previous regime was known as KYC, or Know Your Customer, but which has now been folded up into a much wider and broader requirement referred to as customer due diligence. So you have to perform due diligence on your client, and you have to calculate the risk, the risk or the likelihood that the client might be engaged in money laundering or proliferation of weapons of mass destruction or financing of terrorist activities. Then there is as I said already, the reporting obligation that follows from that. Then you have an obligation to appoint a compliance officer. It must be someone who works for the organization with sufficient seniority so that their assessments and opinions cannot be overruled by more senior people in the organization. And the compliance officer, in the absence of a compliance officer, and perhaps that is quite important, specifically in the context of smaller and medium enterprises. In the absence of such a compliance officer, the board or the owners of the business assume joint and several liability for any compliance breaches. So that's that. And then the last one is, of course, the obligation to maintain records, which is a 5-year record-keeping requirement that we're all familiar with.
And in your opinion, how important is anti-money laundering? Especially, I mean, we've spoken a bit about this off screen earlier this morning, and you gave some examples about how an IFA could perhaps be, in a sense, compromised by means of money laundering. So maybe give us some practical examples for some of our viewers as well.
Okay, well, I mean, obviously, there are 2 approaches to answering your question. For a money launderer, money laundering is quite important, but it is of course also important to us that we combat money laundering, because money laundering is a form of greed, and greed is a worthwhile adversary. So wherever we are able to effectively combat greed, that in itself, I maintain, has an inner value, a substantive inner value that you don't need to justify in the context of anything else. To identify money laundering is not always that easy. Where accountable institutions experience difficulties is not with the majority of the reports, because there the criteria are quite simple. If you do a cash transaction which exceeds 49,999 rand, so it's nice and easy to identify, provided that you have the internal controls. Where it becomes a little bit problematic is when you have to report either a suspicious transaction or a suspicious activity. So here it becomes a little bit more grey, and the first question to answer is that what you have to report is not the fact that something is in fact suspicious. So the law does not require you to become Magnum PI and go and investigate and expose yourself to potential dangers or anything like that. If you suspect that it is suspicious, what you're reporting is your suspicion. You're not reporting the fact. It is up to the regulators to decide how they deal and treat with that information. In financial services, specifically for IFAs, it may be a small thing. It may just be a client who comes in and makes a lump sum investment, has no or little regard to the early withdrawal penalties or anything like that, perhaps does not even make an inquiry about early withdrawal penalties, doesn't alert you to the fact that there might be an early withdrawal, but then 2 or 3 weeks later, after having committed for a term numbering years for the investment, after a couple of weeks or months even, claims that the situation has changed, the context has changed, and then makes a withdrawal. And that is, to my mind, the type of a transaction or activity that is worth reporting. It's no skin off your nose if it turns out that it is not an illegal or suspicious activity. In any event, you're not allowed to tell the client that you've made the report.
Now, part of the risk or the RMCP and customer due diligence documents, there's also a link where advisors can typically go and view whether the clients are on a sanctions list. But you've mentioned that there are actually different type of sanctions, like more in terms of the financial institutions, and then terrorists, for example. They are, if I'm not mistaken, on their own sets of lists. But tell us a bit more about what is a sanctioned person and this differences in perhaps the sanction lists.
All right. I think the easiest way to approach it is to look at the sources for these lists. The one source is referred to in Section 25 of POCTATARA, the Protection of Constitutional Democracy Against Terrorist and Related Activities Act, and I'm very pleased I got that out in one go. So this typically would be a list of persons who have either in the past been convicted or who are strongly suspected by the United Nations Security Council of being terrorists or being terrorist financiers and engaging in terrorist activities, and also the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. So that Section 25 in POCTATARA cross-refers to Section 28 with a capital A in the FICA. And there is an absolute prohibition on an accountable institution. If your client is one of those persons, then you may not do business with that client. So quite apart from the penalties that are imposed under in terms of the FICA, you may also at some point be charged under POCTATARA. And that's a bit of a game changer, because whereas FICA, with 100 million rand or 15 years imprisonment penalty for certain offences, okay, pales into insignificance by comparison to the penalties imposed in POCTATARA, which could be life imprisonment and up to R1 billion in penalties. So absolute prohibition. Then the second set, which is slightly more problematic, are the so-called targeted financial sanctions. So targeted financial sanctions against persons who are also suspected of financing terrorist activities or being sanctions busters or things like that. So in their case, there may not be an absolute prohibition, but there may be limitations in terms of the business that you can do with that. And when you interrogate the lists, those limitations are provided to you, so you can read up about it. If you choose to do business with such a person, the likelihood is that you may have to do some kind of a report in any event. No, not the likelihood, you must do a report. But you are allowed to do business with those persons as long as you don't exceed the scope of the sanctions that have been imposed on them. So you can do business within that scope, but not outside of the scope. In my experience, for the vast majority of smaller and medium enterprises, it's just not worth it. So typically in the RMCP, people say, if you're a potential match on either of those lists, or sets of lists rather, we're not going to do business with you.
Given that most of our viewers, if not all, are independent financial advisors, and given perhaps your business model that you've built around Easy Fika, how can you practically help new, young, upcoming advisors when they build their business with your system that you have in place? Maybe tell us a bit more just from your point of view.
That's quite easy. You have to perform customer due diligence, which means that you have to bring to bear certain criteria, certain risk criteria to the client, calculate the risk, and the way that you calculate the risk is based on whether your client is a sanctioned individual or not, how well certain you are about the veracity of the information that you obtain about your client, and that kind of thing, and then calculate the risk. In practice, that kind of an exercise, when you do it manually, takes between 45 minutes and an hour if you want to do it properly, bearing in mind that the manner in which you do that, if you do it manually, must at all times comply with what you have written in your RMCP. Our software system automates that, and it brings that time down from about an hour to 1.5 minutes. And all your lists have been screened, the risks have been calculated, and the records are there.
Chris, now maybe a question also then, if you were now an IFA, what can IFAs expect if the FIC now starts knocking on your door? What would that typical visit be from the FIC? What can an IFA expect in practice to then happen?
Okay, that's a good question. I think firstly, the FIC's not necessarily going to come and visit an IFA, because the Financial Sector Conduct Authority has delegated authority as a supervisory body to do those inspections on behalf of the FIC. Financial advisors have, I think, carried a disproportionate burden for a long time, because they are so well regulated, and therefore they are better exposed to industries like, and I say this with all respect, like for instance the estate agents, who haven't been subjected to as many compliance in investigations and inspections. So they've already carried their fair share of the burden. Because there are no major upheavals in terms of the context and surrounding circumstances for IFAs, if the regulator comes to pay a visit to you now, and I'm drawing here on some of the enforcement notices that have been posted on the FIC's website, it is clear that when the FIC goes, they are quite targeted, because they for the last number of years have targeted the retail motor industry. What the FSCA and also the Prudential Authority have been doing, because the market is more settled, is they sweep with a broad broom. So they will look at every single compliance obligation that you have. They won't necessarily target only one aspect like training or so on, but they will look at everything to see whether you comply, because an IFA has had long enough to incorporate all of those requirements into the practice.
And then, Chris, on this slide, what we also highlight for the audience is then the scope of the FIC's inspection. So it's interesting, 75% or 302 out of the 402 of the FIC's compliance inspections conducted during 2022 and 2023 focused on legal practitioners.
Now, Chris, it is maybe then also important to talk to our audience today about why we FIC our clients from an ethical viewpoint. So maybe then also worthwhile answering the question, how does FICA influence or then fit into the picture of ethics, before we also move on to another discussion with you on ethics. In executing its mandate, the FIC seeks to protect the integrity of the financial system by making it more difficult for criminals to hide their illicit proceeds in the formal financial sector and block the accumulation of resources for the financing of terrorism. And then also by identifying the proceeds of crime and assisting in combating money laundering and the financing of terrorism. The FIC fulfills its primary role of protecting the integrity of South Africa's financial system and making it intolerant to abuse. And I suppose lastly, from an ethical point, it would be that when you comply with FICA, you will typically ensure your business have the right processes, which also keeps you accountable and ensures you deal with your clients and their money in an ethical manner.
Chris, now moving on slightly to maybe a different topic, moving away from FICA per se and more into the ethical part of life, of financial advice, of maybe just in general. You wrote a book recently called The Ethics of Greed, and it's available on Amazon for if anyone wanted to perhaps go and have a look. But this for me was a very interesting title, so I thought I'd first start off by asking you why the title, Ethics of Greed?
Simply because if we really understand what ethics is at its core, then something like the ethics of greed is entirely possible and plausible. All that it means, all that ethics really means is if I have an intellectual commitment to living a life that is filled with meaning, then I can say that I am an ethical person. What the substance is of the things that give me meaning is an entirely different question. So if the pursuit of greed or profit at all costs, then money, those perhaps more shallow things in life, if those are the things from which I derive meaning, then that is where my ethics sits. There are other people who may get their kicks from something that is perhaps a little bit deeper or perhaps a little bit more intellectual. Doesn't mean that one person is unethical and the other is ethical. It just means that they are both ethical, but the substance of their ethics differs quite substantially.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good day. Today I would like to discuss a very important part of the advice process, namely suitability. When we look at the requirements of treating customers fairly, it clearly states that a key factor when providing financial advice is a suitability analysis. Furthermore, the Act makes this not optional but compulsory to do. The heading of paragraph 8 of the General Code of Conduct of FACE is suitability. When we look at the definitions of the words, suitable is defined as the right or appropriate for a particular purpose or occasion. So suitable is right or appropriate for a particular purpose or occasion. Then when we look at it in FACE language, one can translate this as being right or appropriate for the client's purpose, risk profile, and financial needs. Paragraph 8.1a, b, and c of the General Code of Conduct furthermore states, a provider must, prior to providing a client with advice, take reasonable steps to seek from the client appropriate and available information regarding the client's financial situation, financial product experience, and objectives to enable the provider to provide the client with appropriate advice. Further, conduct an analysis for the purposes of advice based on the information obtained. And finally, identify the financial product or products that will be appropriate to the client's risk profile and financial needs, subject to the limitations imposed on the provider under the Act or any contractual arrangement. When we do a suitability test, there are 4 requirements to ensure that a client can make an informed decision. And this will also determine whether you have given good or bad advice. First of all, we need to gather information. We need to obtain a list of the client's needs and objectives, and obviously his instructions. We need to determine what the financial needs of the clients are and what they are trying to achieve. So the list of information that we need to gather is actually almost endless. From a quantitative aspect, you will need to at least determine the client's available capital to invest or spend, in other words, the affordability, as well as debt, emergency savings, and income requirements. The client's income, expenses, assets, and liabilities may help identify the factors which can be used in the analysis that we will be doing in the next step. Qualitative information refers to personal circumstances such as family history, marital status, number of dependents, retirement plans, concerns, and objectives. Information that needs to be gathered can furthermore be divided into 2 broad categories. Firstly, what is the client's current financial situation, his risk profile, his financial product knowledge, and his experience. Secondly, we need to ask what is the financial objectives, that is, their desired future outcome in terms of their financial situation. An advisor should ask a client open-ended questions to determine the accurate answers. We also need to look at a client's long-term ambitions, goals, specific information that may determine the long-term and short-term goals. And generally, we need to gather information about the client's assets and liabilities, about his current financial situation, financial product experience, savings, debt, investment portfolios, existing and future, tax liabilities, assumed level of knowledge, as well as any other information that can be used to determine the needs and objectives. The second step would be the client's risk profile. We need to determine what the client's risk profile is, whether he is conservative as an investor or aggressive, and anything else that may affect his risk profile. It's quite a contentious subject and topic in the financial industry, and the Act does not prescribe any risk profiles to be used, as long as you have a format and a profile that's reliable that you can use to determine your client's risk profile, and to ensure that all factors are considered when you build a reliable profile. The third step is to use the gathered information and to look at products to be recommended to the client. And then once products have been selected, to look at the key features and benefits of these products. We need to compare the needs and objectives and risk profiles with the key features and benefits of the products selected. We also need to determine the client's understanding of these features and benefits. We need to ensure that client's instructions based on the information provided is in line with the products recommended. We also need to compose a proposal to list the steps and outcomes in the financial advice process. And finally, enter into a signed agreement regarding the outcome achieved. So step 1, gather information. Step 2, determine the risk. Step 3, product comparison to the first 2 steps. Then the fourth and probably most important step is the disclosure. disclose the key features and benefits of the product to the client, disclose the terms, conditions, and exclusions of the products, and disclose the costs and fees linked to the product. Factors that you need to consider when dealing with suitability is that clients may have certain needs and objectives, but their affordability may not be in line with these needs and objectives. So the information gathered and the products compared needs to be in line with this and needs to be married to the affordability of the client. So the advice and the outcome needs to address and find a suitable solution, and the client needs to make an informed decision. Reduced benefits may still adhere to the suitability requirements if the client can still afford it. Record keeping is vital. It's vital to keep accurate records of the entire process and to ensure that a contractual agreement is entered into with the client based on the agreement reached and the evidence gathered. I always say that if something has not been said in writing, it has not been said. So accurate records can always protect the client and the advisor when there is a situation where there's a complaint with the ombud. When we look at the requirements of treating customers fairly, we always need to act in the best interest of the clients, taking his or her needs and objectives into consideration and ensuring all efforts have been made to select the most suitable solution. And we need to have evidence to demonstrate this. I would like to look at two recent cases with the phase ombud to demonstrate the requirement for these steps and the accurate record keeping. The first one is Grobler versus Direct Access. In this case, the respondent, Direct Access, rejected a death claim related to a credit life policy underwritten by Hollard because the deceased client allegedly failed to disclose a pre-existing condition. The deceased had borrowed 25,000 Rand from Westbank, and a credit life policy was instituted through direct marketing channels to cover the outstanding liability to Westbank in the event of death and certain other eventualities. About 2 months after the policy was incepted, the deceased passed away from heart failure. In his determination, the ombud questioned whether the policy's terms and conditions were properly explained during the rendering of the financial service and whether the deceased was able to make an informed decision about the transaction and disclosure conditions which would affect the risk in a very material way. The respondent, Direct Access, claimed that the deceased was advised and understood the exclusionary terms. These were explained to him in the telephonic conversation during which the policy was sold to him and were listed in a terms and conditions flyer that was distributed with the finalized loan and a copy of the credit life insurance policy. Also, the deceased had taken out a previous loan from Westbank, which was subject to a similar credit life policy. Therefore, he should have understood the terms and conditions of the new policy. The ombud did an in-depth analysis of the conversation between the deceased and the respondent's call center agent. What is critical, the ombud points out, isn't the mere disclosure and acceptance by the deceased, but establishing whether the respondent complied with its duties in terms of Section 3 of the FA's General Code of Conduct, which requires that disclosures must be appropriate. In other words, the deceased must have understood the disclosures to make an informed decision. The ombud ruled in favour of the complainant, stating that the process that was followed was simply not adequate or sufficient as envisaged by the FA's Act. Before making the recommendation for cover, the respondent should have obtained more information on the deceased pre-existing conditions and level of knowledge. The second case is Naidu versus SA Home Loans. This complaint dealt with a rejected claim made by the complainant on an SA Home Loans bond protection plan that ensured her life and that of her deceased husband. In the case of the death of either, this policy was meant to cover the amount the couple still owed the respondent, SA Home Loans, and the policy was sold to the complainant by a call centre agent through telephonic direct marketing. The agent never spoke to the husband, even though he was listed as an assured life on the policy. 6 months after the policy was incepted, the complainant's husband died due to a pre-existing heart condition, and her subsequent claim was rejected by SA Home Loans because of the pre-existing conditions clause. The FAIS Ombud, who ruled against SA Home Loans, stated that the disclosure about the pre-existing conditions clause made by the call centre agent was simply inadequate. The complainant was an unsophisticated client with basic education, according to the Ombud. Whilst this may not have been known to the respondent, some simple questions would have led the respondent to understand that he's dealing with a very vulnerable customer. I believe that with this type of consumer, more than cursory attention should have been paid to explaining terms, conditions, exclusions, limitations, and other restrictions to the policy sold in order for the complainant to make an informed decision. In addition, the call centre agent never spoke to the complainant's husband during the financial advice process. Logic would demand that any discussions relating to pre-existing conditions of the deceased ought to have been discussed with the deceased himself. Furthermore, nowhere in the recorded telephone conversation between the complainant and the call centre agent did the latter ask her to disclose any information that would be relevant to the assessment of the risk and the premium. The call centre agent therefore failed to collect sufficient information around the client's needs and circumstances. No two clients are the same, and therefore it is crucial for financial advisors to take the time to talk to the clients and obtain pertinent information on which to base their financial analysis and advice following from that. Finally, in line with treating customers fairly, when providing financial advice, a financial advisor should always act with due skill, care, and diligence, and in the interests of clients and the integrity of the financial services industry. Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. I truly hope that the first 2 sessions have proven valuable thus far. Now, our next session is on finfluencers, and I'd like to share some info before I introduce our speaker on this topic. Fintech, financial technology, has disrupted traditional banking. And as of January 2021, over 14 million British people use a digital-only bank account. Now in South Africa, we saw the same happen with the likes of TymeBank, who this year hit the 7.4 million customer mark. That's adding roughly 130,000 customers per month. Then there's the likes of digital currencies, digital trading apps, and all these form part of a technological-based landscape. Now, except for the landscape that have changed, the users of these tech-based investments also changed. Those that would now typically make use of subscription-based models, those who use digital banking apps, who trade online, and those that even make use of bots and influencers to make purchasing and investing decisions. TikTok has become a go-to platform for Generation Z and millennials to learn and teach all things finance. Now, the hashtag FinTok has over 490 million views, and the hashtag MoneyTok tag has over 8.5 billion views. Now, to describe a Generation Z or millennial, you could potentially look at their age grouping. Now, Gen Z is mostly those born between 1997 and 2012, making them between the ages of 11 and 26, while millennials are born between 1981 and 1996, thus making them 27 to 42 years old. So typically, if you are looking to start moving your business online, or if you are keen to attract younger professionals, you are targeting most probably those between the ages of 26 and 42. Now, except for the different way in which you then approach your marketing plan, the lingo you use to communicate with them, there's also this huge consideration to ethical and regulatory requirements when deciding to move into the space of influencing. Now, firstly, I should maybe mention, finfluencing is maybe just a new form of communicating online. But prior to this, there were other forms like publishing in newspapers or talking on radio. There are no specific regulations relating to the promotion of financial services on specifically social media. However, the Financial Conduct Authority, or the FCA in the UK, has repeatedly stated its concerns for fraudulent content on social media. Now, cryptocurrencies aren't currently regulated by the FCA, meaning that many social media posts around digital tokens are scams. TikTok recently banned some adverts relating to financial services, and Google seems to now seems to be following this trend. Now, some legal considerations which we would thus like to share with you today. Firstly, disclosure and transparency. Most people are not aware, but there is a social media code of conduct that has been published by the Advertising Regulatory Board. So while you may not see the FSCA knocking on your door asking you not to tweet or share your thoughts on Facebook, there are still legal bodies, and influencers and marketers are governed by the Code of Advertising Practice. Then, intellectual property rights and privacy and data protection. As with any other type of social media content, it doesn't just need to be financial content, but you should consider the legalities around intellectual property rights. Of course, if you then start to also collect personal data on social media, then POPIA must be adhered to. Now let's maybe just then look at the ethical considerations. Client first. While you may feel the pressure of delivering content, exceeding your company's expectations, gaining a lot of sales, you should always consider that the client comes first. The manner in which you address the client, the way you advise the client, how you engage with the client, and eventually the manner in which you are compensated does not change just because of the medium you use. Then there's integrity. Now remember the adherence to honesty, fairness, consistency, and candor. Now your position whether it is on social media or in person, is one of trust. For some, it is easier to trust a person they've met in person, but for others, trust is established over time, and your consistency in posting regular content, perhaps even being endorsed by another professional, could establish the trust. Integrity remains thus important, and deliver on your promise if you make any on social media. Objectivity. Here we refer to your intellectual honesty. Don't be influenced or biased. Often companies may use famous people to endorse their brands and build trust online. But this does, however, shy away from the integrity element, as the person advertising the item does not necessarily make use of it, understand it, or even value the product or service on offer. Then there's fairness. This is such a difficult point. How do you treat everyone fair? The reasonability test is already very difficult in practice, and now you are dealing with digital platforms where algorithms could potentially be used to show your content to certain people at certain times. Now, as long as you remain impartial and disclose all facts, you can remain fair, even in the digital world. And if you can prove that the same advice you gave on TikTok, you will put in writing in your office, you remain in most instances fair. Competence. Now, though in practice, we as FPI members are expected to remain skilled and have knowledge of our topic, hence also the CPD requirements, it is interesting that younger generations can easily see when content is not authentic, and younger people trust authentic content much more. So your competence through your knowledge and skills will thus be important for authenticity of the content you create. Diligence. It also refers to the opportunity for members to educate clients about the value of financial planning and the importance of engaging in sound financial practices and behaviors to meet their unique financial goals. Although it is ultimately the client's decision to follow the advice offered, the FPI member motivates the client to take actions that will ultimately benefit them. Social media has given us, as professionals, a platform to educate and talk about financial topics. So be sure that you put on social media content that won't harm your reputation. Social media really has the memory of an elephant, and once it is out there, it is difficult to recall or delete. You may deny that you have given certain advice to some people around the Braaivleis sphere the next day, but it is much more difficult to remove content that's been published online. Sometimes it can be instantly reshared, or someone takes a screenshot or a photo. So be sure you do your due diligence on whatever you promote, advertise, or talk about. Professionalism. Just because you comment on Facebook doesn't mean you shouldn't consider language skills. Be sure not to make unnecessary remarks. There are a lot of cyberbullies, and also be sure not to infringe on people's rights. Though not necessarily an issue with professionalism, you may be held liable for defamation of character. So be very careful what you say on social media, even if it is only commenting on someone else's post. And this also counts when you are on WhatsApp groups. If you are an admin of a WhatsApp group, also be sure of what people reshare or forward on the groups. When you, however, decide to maybe do podcasts, video content, or regular updates on social media, be sure you remain professional there as well. And if you have someone that attends your podcast or you interview someone, be sure that those attendees or the speakers that you get don't damage your reputation, and consider the viewer and how they also perceive your content. And remember, your social media profile is not an alter ego. It is just a digital extension of yourself. But ladies and gentlemen, while I am very passionate about influencers, marketing, and social media, I am by no means the guru. But someone who is quite knowledgeable on this topic is Prof. Alsemgeest from the University of the Free State. While we often host all our speakers here in our Amity studios, Prof. Liesel and the marketing team at the university compiled this insight for us. We would like to thank her and the university for their input this morning and sharing such valuable content.
Hi, I'm Professor Alsemgeest, the Director of the School of Financial Planning Law at the University of the Free State. I am passionate about financial literacy and helping people understand and manage their finances. My research focus at its core is mostly on communication about personal finances, which is seen as a taboo subject. However, my new focus is on finfluencers and specifically how these social media content creators are changing the personal financial communication landscape. In this video, I'll discuss the following. Firstly, what a finfluencer is. Secondly, the importance of finfluencers. Thirdly, growth of the finfluencer space. Fourth, the regulation of finfluencers. Fifth, finfluencers versus financial advisors. And lastly, general tips on social media platforms as a financial advisor. So let's jump right in. A finfluencer, short for financial influencer, is an individual who through digital platforms such as social media, blogs, podcasts, or YouTube, share information, advice, and insights related to personal finance, investments, budgeting, and other financial topics. They aim to influence and educate their audience by providing accessible and relatable content, often with a focus on making financial literacy more engaging and approachable. They may offer tips, strategies, and recommendations to help their followers make informed financial decisions and improve their financial well-being. From the slide, you can see the academic definitions, which is firstly, finfluencers are those individuals who, through social media, impact investor decisions and those who provide unsolicited investment advice. Then, those individuals that talk and post about a broad scope of money-related issues such as managing their everyday personal finances, buying a house, budgeting tips, and paying off debt are also called finfluencers, although these finfluencers might not provide investment advice. So that then indicates that there are definitely two very different types of finfluencers. Those that provide investment advice and those that just talk about their own finances and everyday type of financial decisions. The following are two very different examples of what is considered finfluencers. The first one is very much more of a trader that shows subscribers how he is trading live.
So took some off the table now, have 100 shares. But I want to see if this thing can get down below 184. Well, that might have been the bounce, but I'm not going to give up on it yet. My life is easier now that I've taken some profits off the table. But markets are pulling back right now, which should help me. So I'm just watching the markets right now, and if they keep on coming down, then I'm going to hold. And the markets are pulling back. There we go. So took another 100 off.
The second is more of a lifestyle influencer that is sharing her own budget with her viewers. Thus, there are two very distinct groups.
Okay, so that is it. I've already pre-did the totals. Let's see. So these are the expenses that I spent for the month of January. Obviously, food was out of control. We spent a lot on food this month. Dogs was pretty normal outside of them getting groomed, which costs $240 together. I know it's insane, but we trust them, and I think that's what matters. Personal, I think, is actually pretty consistent. Rent is like $2,100. Work is more than I spent basically all of last year, because we all know I didn't really do too well work-wise last year. I didn't really care. Transportation was lower than last month, and then fun was fun. So fun included, like, we had a party for a gym, and then also kind of like went to the movies. So that's what I consider fun. And yes, food was out of control, and it might look like a lot, but I actually did percentages, because sometimes when I spend a lot visually, like if I see a number and I'm like, okay, Asia, you're out of control, I like to do percentages based on my income for the month. So for like food, for example, I like to stay under 20% of my income, ideally like 15, honestly. But I spent significantly less compared to my income. For financial goals, I put aside 47% of my income.
Finfluencers are important for a number of reasons. First, they can help to educate people about personal finance. Many people find it difficult to understand complex financial topics, such as investing and retirement planning. Finfluencers can break down these topics into smaller, more digestible pieces and make them more relatable to their audience. Second, finfluencers can help to inspire people to take action with their finances. By sharing their own financial stories and experiences, finfluencers can show their followers that it is possible to achieve their financial goals. Third, finfluencers can help to hold financial institutions and companies accountable. Finfluencers are not afraid to speak out about unfair practices or misleading information. By doing so, they can help to protect consumers and promote transparency in the financial industry. Finally, finfluencers can help to make the financial industry more inclusive. Many finfluencers come from diverse backgrounds and represent a variety of viewpoints. This helps to make financial education and information more accessible to everyone. Specific examples of how finfluencers are making a difference is on the slide. Finfluencers are helping to educate people about the importance of saving for retirement. Finfluencers can help people to invest their money wisely. The reason why I put a question mark there is because that there are also quite a few dangers when it comes to finfluencers providing investment advice specifically. I will discuss that later on in the video. Finfluencers are helping people to get out of debt. Finfluencers are helping people to build wealth. Finfluencers are helping people to make informed financial decisions. Overall, finfluencers play an important role in helping people to improve their financial well-being. By providing education, inspiration, and accountability, finfluencers are helping people to achieve their financial goals and live better lives. Traditionally, it has been taboo to talk about personal finances, and this is mostly because of three main reasons. Firstly, the belief that money is a private matter. Many people believe that their financial situation is personal and should not be shared with others. This belief may be rooted in the idea that money is a reflection of one's social status or worth. Secondly, the fear of judgment. People may be afraid of being judged by others if they are not financially successful. They may also be afraid of being seen as greedy or selfish if they talk about their wealth. Thirdly, the lack of financial literacy. Many people do not feel comfortable talking about personal finances because they do not have a good understanding of it. They may be embarrassed to admit that they do not know much about money. The taboo around talking about personal finances can have a number of negative consequences. It can prevent people from getting the financial help they need. It can lead to financial stress and anxiety, and it can perpetuate financial inequality. However, there is a growing movement to break down this taboo around talking about personal finances. People are starting to realize that money is a shared experience and that there is no shame in talking about it. And one of the major ways that this is happening is through finfluencers. Financial bloggers, podcasters, and social media influencers are using their platforms to share their own financial stories and experiences and to teach others about personal finance. As more people talk openly about their finances, the taboo will begin to fade. The finfluencer space has grown rapidly over the past few years. In 2020, there were an estimated 100,000 finfluencers worldwide. By 2022, that number had grown to over 250,000, and the trend is only continuing to grow. There are a number of factors that have contributed to the growth of the finfluencer space. First, the rise of social media has made it easier for finfluencers to reach a large audience. Second, the increasing complexity of the financial landscape has created a demand for financial education and information. And third, the growing awareness of financial literacy has made people more receptive to the advice of influencers. The growth of the finfluencer space has had a number of positive impacts. First, it has made financial education and information more accessible to people from all walks of life. Second, it has helped to demystify the financial industry and make it more inclusive. And third, it has given people a voice and a platform to share their own financial stories and experiences. However, the growth of this influencer space has also created some challenges. One challenge is that it can be difficult for investors to assess the credibility of influencers. Another challenge is that some influencers may promote high-risk investments or provide misleading or fraudulent advice. Despite these challenges, the finfluencer space is likely to continue to grow in the coming years. Finfluencers can play an important role in helping people to improve their financial well-being by providing education, inspiration, and accountability. Finfluencers can help people to achieve their financial goals and live better lives. There are some interesting statistics about the finfluencer space. Firstly, the average finfluencer has over 10,000 followers. Secondly, 70% of finfluencers are under the age of 35. Thirdly, 60% of finfluencers are female. Fourth, the most popular finfluencer topics are investing, saving money, and getting out of debt. Fifth, 70% of investors trust financial advice from finfluencers. Six, 50% of investors have made an investment decision based on the advice of a finfluencer. Seventh, the finfluencer market is expected to grow to over $1 billion by 2025. Overall, the finfluencer space is growing rapidly and is having a significant impact on the financial industry. Finfluencers are playing an important role in helping people to improve their financial well-being. The regulation of finfluencers is still in its early stages, but there is a growing trend towards more regulation in this area. This is because finfluencers can play a positive role in educating and informing investors, but they can also pose risk to investors if they are not providing accurate and reliable information. In the United States, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, has issued guidance on how finfluencers should comply with security laws. The SEC's guidance requires finfluencers to disclose any material relationships they have with financial products or service providers and to refrain from making misleading or fraudulent statements about financial products or services. In addition to the SEC's guidance, there are a number of state laws that govern financial advertising and marketing. These laws vary from state to state, but they typically require financial advertisers to disclose certain information, such as their fees and risks associated with their products or services. In the European Union, the Markets in Financial Instruments Directive, the MIFID, regulates the provision of investment advice. The MIFID requires investment advisors to be registered with the financial regulator and to comply with certain standards of conduct. While the MIFID does not specifically mention finfluencers, it is possible that some finfluencers may be considered investment advisors and therefore subject to MIFID requirements. Other countries have also implemented legislation or regulations that govern finfluencers. For example, in Singapore, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, the MAS, has issued guidelines on how finfluencers should promote financial products or services. The MAS's guidelines require finfluencers to be objective and to disclose any material relationships they have with financial products or service providers. There is no specific legislation regulating finfluencers in South Africa. However, finfluencers may be subject to other laws and regulations, such as the Consumer Protection Act and the Financial Advisory and Intermediary Services Act, or the FIS Act. The Consumer Protection Act protects consumers from misleading or deceptive marketing practices. This means that finfluencers cannot make false or misleading claims about financial products or services. They must also disclose any material relationships they have with financial product or service providers. The FIS Act regulates the provision of financial advice in South Africa. It could be possible that some finfluencers may be considered financial advisors under the FIS Act. If so, they would need to register with the Financial Sector Conduct Authority, the FSCA, and comply with the FIRES Act requirements. Overall, the regulatory landscape for finfluencers in South Africa is still developing. However, there are a number of laws and regulations that finfluencers should be aware of, and there are also a number of industry self-regulatory organizations that have developed guidelines for finfluencers. Here are some of the key challenges in regulating finfluencers. Firstly, defining who is a finfluencer. It can be difficult to define who is a finfluencer, especially in the online world where people can create and share content anonymously. Secondly, monitoring finfluencer content. It can be difficult to monitor all of the content that finfluencers produce, especially on social media platforms. And thirdly, enforcing regulations. It can be difficult to enforce regulations against finfluencers, especially those who are based in other countries. As the finfluencer industry continues to grow, we might expect to see more developments in terms of possible regulation in this area. So where does this leave financial advisors? As mentioned previously, the Financial Advisor and Intermediary Services Act, the FIRES Act, regulates the rendering of financial advisory and intermediary services to clients. The Act's main objectives are to protect the interest of consumers and to professionalize the financial services industry. In terms of the FIRES Act, nobody is allowed to render financial services regarding financial products as a regular feature of his or her business without being authorized as a financial services provider or appointed as a representative of an authorized provider. Also, according to the Act, advice is defined as any recommendation, guidance, or proposal of a financial nature furnished by any means or medium to a client or group of clients in respect of the purchase or investment in any financial product, the conclusion of any other transaction aimed at incurring any right or benefit or liability in respect of any financial product. This includes a loan or cession, or the variation, replacement, or termination of any financial product. So, in terms of that definition, it is important to be able to determine whether a finfluencer actually gave advice to a client or subscriber. Also, with many finfluencers being based in different countries other than South Africa, this will be almost impossible to regulate. So, should financial advisors see finfluencers as competition? Finfluencers can be seen as competition. However, my opinion is that finfluencers should rather be seen as collaborators or as complementary to the services provided by financial advisors. On the one hand, finfluencers are in some cases providing advice and guidance to their followers, which is traditionally the role of financial advisors. Finfluencers may also be able to reach a wider audience than financial advisors, as they can use social media to connect with people all around the world. On the other hand, finfluencers can help to educate the public about financial topics and generate interest in financial planning. This can lead to more people seeking financial advice from professional financial advisors, specifically for more complex aspects of financial planning, such as retirement and estate planning. Whether or not finfluencers are competition for financial advisors depends on a number of factors, including the type of financial advisor, the type of finfluencer, and the target audience. For example, a financial advisor who specializes in working with high net worth individuals may not view finfluencers as a significant threat, as their target audience is likely to be more sophisticated and require more specialized advice. However, a financial advisor who specializes in working with young adults may view finfluencers as a more direct competitor. Financial advisors who are able to embrace social media and use it to connect with their target audience can reduce the competitive threat posed by finfluencers. Financial advisors can also use social media to educate the public about financial topics, establish themselves as experts, and generate leads. If you are interested in using social media as a financial advisor, then these general tips might be helpful. 1. Choose the right platforms. Remember, not all social media platforms are created equal. Some platforms, such as LinkedIn and Twitter, are better suited for sharing professional content, while others, such as Instagram and TikTok, are better suited for sharing more personal content. Choose the platform that are most relevant to your target audience and that you are most comfortable using. 2. Develop a content strategy. Before you start posting, take some time to develop a content strategy. This will help you to create and share content that is consistent, informative, and engaging. Your content strategy should include a mix of different types of content, such as blog posts, articles, videos, and infographics. 3. Be consistent. Post regularly on your chosen platforms. This will help you to stay top of mind with your audience and build a following. Aim to post at least every few days, but more often is better. 4. Be engaging. Social media is all about engagement. Respond to comments and questions from your followers. Ask questions yourself to start conversations. Participate in relevant groups and communities. 5. Be professional. Remember that you are representing yourself and your business on social media. Be professional in your interactions with others and avoid posting anything that could be seen as offensive or inappropriate. 6. Share your expertise. Use your social media platforms to share your expertise in financial planning and investment. This will help you to establish yourself as a thought leader in your industry and build trust with your audience. 7. Educate your audience. Many people are looking for financial education and information. Use your social media platforms to educate your audience about financial topics. This could include topics such as budgeting, saving for retirement, and investing. 8. Promote your services. In addition to sharing educational content, you can also use your social media platforms to promote your services. However, be careful not to be too focused on sales, as this will be a turn-off for your audience. Instead, focus on providing valuable information and resources that will help your audience to make informed financial decisions. 9. Run social media contests and giveaways. Social media contests and giveaways are a great way to engage your audience and generate leads. Be sure to offer prizes that are relevant to your target audience. 10. Track your results. It is important to track your social media results so that you can see what is working and what is not. This will help you to refine your content strategy and improve your results over time. By following these tips, you can use social media to build your brand, generate leads, and grow your business. Thank you for watching this video about Finfluencers. I hope you have learned something new about this growing trend in the financial services industry. Finfluencers can play a positive role in educating people about personal finance. However, it is important to be aware of the potential risks associated with Finfluencers. Thank you again for watching.
Ladies and gentlemen, our last speaker for this morning, maybe I did keep the best for last, is none other than Anton Swanepoel. I asked Anton to come and talk to us this morning about Ko-fi. Thank you so much, Anton, for agreeing yet again to present to our audience.
Colleagues, welcome to this update on the Ko-fi legislation. I've got 30 minutes to just give you a synopsis of where we are with Ko-fi, what are the things that you should look out for, and in 30 minutes we've got enough time just to address 3 very quick points. The first is just a reminder of what Ko-fi is. Secondly, when is Ko-fi going to be promulgated? That is the question that most people are asking. Where are we? When is it coming? When will it be law, and what changes do we need to anticipate? So the third one is, what can you do now to start preparing for this legislation? I think I'm going to address the elephant in the room first. When? In the last few weeks, I've contacted the FSCA, and the senior manager dealing with COFI affairs mentioned that she's in touch with National Treasury. Obviously, they are the ones who drive the process, submit it to Parliament, etc. And according to the senior analyst and manager on COFI affairs at the FSCA, it is every intention of National Treasury to submit this to Parliament and Cabinet before the end of this year. Respectfully, I don't think there's any stakeholder in the financial services industry who expect this to happen before the end of the year. At this point in time, the greatest priority, it seems, would be the two-part system and the implementation thereof. So we can't see that there's sufficient capacity with the FSCA and National Treasury to submit the COFI bill to Cabinet and Parliament. What they've indicated, though, is that they are working relentlessly towards, worst case scenario, submitting this to Cabinet and Parliament before the elections next year. So nobody is sure of the implementation date, but that does not mean that you can't start preparing for COFI. A quick reminder, what is COFI? I'm constantly surprised with industry stakeholders who firstly have not read the COFI bill, is not familiar with how the Financial Sector Regulation Act applies to the COFI bill. So this is just a very, very quick reminder of what COFI is. Firstly, it must be remembered that COFI is always read with the Financial Sector Regulation Act. And as you can see on the screen, the Financial Sector Regulation Act is the legislation that has laid the foundation for COFI to come into fruition, to be implemented. Without the Financial Sector Regulation Act, COFI would not be possible. And the objective of the FSR Act is to create a financial regulation system for the entire industry. And if one can summarize its objective, it's really primarily to create financial stability, and then of course for the regulator to regulate financial services providers, and in essence to improve the conduct of financial services providers, financial institutions. And the FSR Act, as I said, created a foundation for COFI to exist, and the idea is to have one set of market conduct regulation that cuts across the board. It not only applies to financial services providers, FSPs, but also product suppliers as well as administrative and Category 2 FSPs. In a nutshell, the FSR Act aims to create, which they have done successfully, twin peaks, the prudential regulator, and they've established the FSCA. That is the groundwork that was necessary to bring Twin Peaks into implementation, and then of course the main focus is on market conduct legislation as stipulated in terms of the COFI bill. Quick reminder, these are the pieces of legislation currently in existence. And when the COFI bill becomes an act, they aim to absorb all those principles and rules into the Conduct of Financial Institutions Act. So they're going to consolidate. There's a lot of overlap from a principles-based regulation point of view in all of those pieces of legislation. A couple of common denominators which is going to be absorbed in the COFI Act, and always read with the Financial Sector Regulation Act. And of course, from the COFI bill, which will, when it becomes an act, there will be conduct standards that will be added to that legislation. Integrated into the COFI bill very clearly are the 6 treating customers fairly outcomes. And there are 3 of those 6 that are of particular importance for FSPs, which I will allude to a bit later. The objective of the COFI bill is really phase on steroids. It's about protection of customers. It's about creating confidence and trust in the financial services sector. The TCF principles are very clearly highlighted in the objectives of the COFI bill. And then, of course, inclusion and transformation as well. If you take the Phase Act currently, since its implementation in 2004, we are almost 20 years down the line in a mini COFI piece of legislation which we have all became familiar with. So if you compare the Phase Act to COFI, this is what you're going to see. The Phase Act is like a mini COFI bill, and then when COFI is implemented, it is just spread a lot wider, where some of the principles remain exactly the same. For example, under Phase we had the fit and proper requirements. Not much, in my opinion, will change when COFI becomes law. And then we also had the General Code of Conduct, which is the primary set of subordinate legislation under Phase currently that regulate market conduct and client engagement, the way we treat customers and the things we need to do to treat customers fairly, to earn their trust and to get business and maintain that business. Under COFI, the General Code of Conduct is going to be replaced by conduct standards. The principles, I don't think, will change much. Much of those and many of the principles that have currently been regulated under the General Code of Conduct has been submitted to the Ombud in real cases, and the Ombud's Office and the Financial Services Tribunal have firmly established much and many of the General Code of Conduct principles. Therefore, we've got about a 19, almost 20-year history of those principles in the General Code of Conduct being tested from a principles point of view. So they have stress tested the fundamentals in the General Code of Conduct which have been entrenched in our law. And therefore those principles I don't think is going to change much. If any, between 10 and 15% at most of the General Code of Conduct will see a facelift in the conduct standards. So what do you need to do in preparation of COFI? Should you just stand back and wait for COFI to be implemented? The reason I've got the Springboks at the 2023 Rugby World Cup as the picture on the slideshow is I want to use that as an analogy. This team started 4 years ago in its preparation for the 2023 Rugby World Cup. They couldn't just wait for the World Cup to start making plans. All those strategies, the exercises, the training sessions, etc. If one looks at the Springbok side, they've made us so proud when they beat France, so proud. However, what we don't see is the preparation that they have done leading up to this World Cup, leading up to them facing England in the semi-finals and probably the finals. So what is happening behind the scenes? What did they do? What did they have to do to reach this stage of the Rugby World Cup? One of the 4 teams going into a final. Top 4 teams in the world. I'm convinced that you will recognize that every training session, every week, for them to be fit and ready to play the game at this top level, to be competitive, they couldn't just sit back and start preparing at the beginning of the Rugby World Cup. They have trained, they've played games to warm themselves up and to prepare themselves. And the same, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, apply to us as FSPs. We cannot wait for COFI to be implemented and then to respond. In my opinion, we are in the final couple of months leading up to the whistle blowing of COFI. And therefore, what I'd like to present to you today is there are a couple of things that you as a key individual or leading representative in your FSP to start considering. The first is to recognize that COFI is a puzzle. It consists of many moving parts. And if you want to solve this puzzle of COFI in your practice, in your business, you've got to recognize that like any puzzle that is built from the frame inward, what I'd like to present to you and reinforce is how important it is going to be for you to get the frame of your business puzzle thought through, articulated, and implemented before that whistle blows. The first is you need to recognize that the first TCF outcome of culture is now fully entrenched in the COFI bill. This is something that you can start preparing for. So there you will see, as part of the 6 outcomes, the first thing that I believe you need to revisit is how is your culture that you want to entrench as part of the DNA of your business? How is that thought through, articulated, and implemented in the business? The second is, if you have not yet articulated the culture, perhaps it is of value for you to consider the 8 principles in terms of the ethics, the code of ethics, as it has been published with the Financial Planning Institute. Those 8 principles, I think most of you will say, well, I do that anyway, or I try to do that anyway. However, if it is not articulated and forms part of your corporate governance structure, then the regulator will not know which of those ethical principles actually form part of your training in your organization, and how is it managed and being overseen by the key individuals. So therefore, from a culture point of view, I would like to point you to the FBI Code of Ethics that actually explain and articulate all of those ethical principles. If your FSP consistently demonstrate these values in your business, and it's articulated, if you audit it by the FSCA, you can present to them your client engagement policy, which includes the ethical principles. So that's my first recommendation to you. Make sure that you have thought through the underlying building blocks of what those building blocks are that will lay a sound foundation for an ethical culture to be lived out and demonstrated in your practice or business. The second is that suitability is now also firmly entrenched. When dealing with customers, the COFI bill puts a magnifying glass on what we currently refer to as Section 8 of the General Code of Conduct. The COFI bill now puts a magnifying glass on suitability. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I cannot stress enough how the industry white paper on risk profiling as a component of suitability will be a critical paper for you to analyze and be aware of, and then in that paper focus on, from a suitability point of view, how do you as an investment focused practice highlight client objectives, needs, required return, risk required in order to achieve that return, the risk tolerance of a client that needs to be considered, and risk capacity. Those are the critical building blocks that must be evident in your presentations to clients, because without those building blocks, suitability would be a huge question mark in your business. So therefore, I strongly advise that you again read that paper, maybe over the Christmas holiday for your reading pleasure. Go through the 45-odd page paper to cement the fundamentals of suitability from an investment point of view. Colleagues, this slide will be very familiar to those who have attended some of my sessions in the past. The reason this is so important is that these are the undeniable building blocks and fundamentals of your practice. It's never changed. Prospecting, making phone calls for an appointment, arriving at your appointment, showing up as a professional and conducting an analysis, getting all those steps. The whole industry has agreed that those are critical building blocks in your business. More importantly, all of them are regulated, either through POPIA, FICA, phase currently, COFI to come, and then of course every part of the regulatory framework applies to those steps and the rest of the elements in your practice, where you are appointing people, the training that you provide to them, etc., etc. Every single one of those components is currently regulated, either through FICA, POPIA, the Phase Act, and none of that will change under COFI. In fact, there's going to be a bit of a facelift on the rules and regulations governing FSPs going forward. So how is that process going to change under COFI? Firstly, culture and governance under Chapter 4 of the COFI bill highlights very specifically that FSPs and other financial institutions will have to document the culture they want to live out in that organization and the corporate governance processes and procedures. It must be articulated. So every FSP going forward will do well to have a culture and governance policy in place. When it comes to client engagement, suitability is the main focus point. And recording, being able to demonstrate the process you followed in the client engagement process. What documentation confirms that engagement and highlights the suitability of advice? But here's the challenge, because most of it we currently do, bar for I'm not convinced that FSPs have paid sufficient consideration to the risk profiling white paper. However, most of those are currently followed. However, the client experience, because of the volume of paperwork, is a question mark. Most advisors that I speak to highlight the concern that all the paperwork and all the documentation from a compliance point of view is restraining the advisor experience and client experience. So there's a very interesting challenge under COFI. How do we simplify it? In the business, policies and procedures, from a COFI perspective, it needs to get a facelift. So every FSP will do well to go back to the drawing board and strategically decide what information will be contained in their culture and governance policy. And from a client engagement point of view, bearing in mind that FSPs, fair treatment of customers, lie in the left column. So therefore, a client engagement policy as part of your corporate governance framework will be inevitable. So therefore, what can you do? You can take this slide, which will be sent to you in a PDF format. Consider this framework under COFI and consider rejuvenating your client engagement process with the suitability from a risk profiling point of view, making sure that the record keeping is intact, and articulating your client engagement policy so that everybody in the business, representatives, key individuals, compliance officers, supervisors, the FSCA and the phase ombud can all be on the same page when they read your client engagement policy. Colleagues, this is going to be the main challenge under COFI, because if you have the Phase Act that currently consists of about 160 pages with the fit and proper requirements, the General Code of Conduct, etc., and that is now going to go to 1,000 pages when you consider the COFI bill, the FSR Act and the conduct standards. What is it that you can do to simplify? That is really the challenge that the entire industry is facing. Legislation is mushrooming. I did a survey a few months ago, and there seems to be agreement amongst FSPs that we are totally overregulated in South Africa. So the main challenge is, when legislation mushrooms, we overregulate it as it is. How do we simplify this position to ensure a positive and sustainable advisor experience within FSPs? And then, most importantly, how do we ensure a positive professional client experience? Here is part of my solution in conclusion. From a professional standard point of view, if one takes the 10-step process of client engagement, surely every client will appreciate dealing with a professional. And that is the principle and the outcome, that from a client engagement and a professional point of view, the outcome you want is trust. Because without trust, there's no relationship, and without trust, there's no transaction. So one needs to ask in your strategic preparation towards COFI, how do I rejuvenate my client engagement process in such a way that I have found the best way to achieve trusted relationships? If your focus is there, ladies and gentlemen, I'm convinced that in 80% of the times, the compliance requirements will be met by default. It depends where your focus is going to be. Is it on professional client engagement, or is it to comply with the law? Ladies and gentlemen, the Springboks is an extremely professional outfit. So is the All Blacks and all of those top teams in the Rugby World Cup. If they had to purely focus on the rules of the game and not focus on attack as well, you will see that in every game in the World Cup, offense was as important as defense. One cannot win a game by purely focusing on the rules. It will devastate a team. They must have an offensive strategy on attack to score tries and to score points. But they need a strong defensive line. How mad does the South African rugby supporter get when an opposite side breaks our defensive line? We are up in arms. So here's the strategy, ladies and gentlemen. If you want to win the cup and be competitive in your environment, COFI is going to give you the opportunity to go back to the drawing board and start afresh. So in my mind, in preparation of COFI, you will do well to set a day aside to focus on your offensive strategy. How do you attack in the most professional and competent way to win business? And then, of course, one should also bear in mind the rules of the game. That's how you prepare for COFI. Your offensive and defensive strategy is two sides of the same coin, but your focus must be on professionalism. And then, of course, the only tool that can truly set you apart going forward with the escalation of regulation, and you only have 24 hours a day. If legislation mushroom and you could have 26 hours or 30 hours a day, maybe you don't need technology that much. But where your day only consists of 24 hours and you've got much more to do, this whole issue around technology innovation, ladies and gentlemen, for you to remain competitive, you've got no choice but to up your game in terms of applying technology. And that will lead, if you master professionalism, offensive strategy, you integrate your defensive strategy as part of your makeup and make it the same thing. Then use technology optimally. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the key for enhancing the advisor experience and client experience. Thank you for listening.